afternoon, viewers. Welcome to McElroy's Motors. Today's date is June 19th, 2024. Happy Juneteenth to anybody who celebrates. And in today's video, it will be part 2 of all the vehicles I had owned since I got my driver's license in 2016. Roadworks! So to recap, in part 1 of the video series I made of all the vehicles I had owned, I talked about my first car, which was a 1991 Eagle Premier, my second car, which was the god-awful 1997 Dodge Neon, and my third car, which I took to Washington, D.C. for the very first time, which was a 2002 Pontiac Sunfire. More roadworks! When will it end? So we pick up now on car number 4, which was my 1997 Honda Odyssey, a car that I bought for just $250 off an estate sale. And even though the engine and overall the mechanical bits were in good shape, the rest of the van was not. And what made it interesting is it was a minivan without any sliding doors at all, so it just had regular pull-out doors just like any other car you see. I sadly do not have any pictures of it, but because 1, I didn't really take pictures of it back then, and 2, when I first got it, the interior on it was an absolute train wreck. But what made it even more interesting was its overall title status. The person I ended up buying the Odyssey off of did not tell me that there was some kind of lien on the title, so as such I only had the van for maybe at best a few short weeks before it eventually got repossessed by the company that supposedly had lien on the title. So thank God it wasn't my fault, it was more fault of the previous owner. And what made it even more interesting is even though it was badged as a Honda, it didn't leave the factory as such. So the previous owner not only bought himself a makeshift Honda that left the factory as an Isuzu Oasis. So there was a whole problem with the titling scheme, even if he wasn't at fault for the title transferring in progress. So either I was buying a Honda or an Isuzu or a Honda. There was no way of actually knowing unless you looked really hard back into the car's overall history. So this overall titling scheme of not being able to tell if it was an Isuzu or a Honda right away, plus the overall lien with the title, just made it increasingly difficult for me to actually register the car. So as such, I just got rid of it after a couple of weeks, and it went back to the lien holder that had the lien on the title in the first place. Now we're on to car number 5, which was a 1994 Ford Tempo, and the famous light blue that pretty much made any 90s Ford complete. I paid $700 for that car, and I'll admit, it was not a dreadful car, but at the same time, it was a dreadful car. One thing it was good at was providing by far the best heater I've had in any car, but what made it dreadful was the simple fact that it, rather unsurprisingly, didn't last very long at all. That car lasted me about 2 months, before eventually the transmission leaked so much fluid to the point I couldn't get out of park one day, and the transmission pretty much froze, so I had basically to tow it out of my property I had at the time. But car number 6 is where it gets interesting because it was my 1984 Trabant 601S that I made a video of earlier in my YouTube career. However, when I had my Trabant, I had a 1993 Ford Escort station wagon. And let me tell you, that car, out of all the cheap cars I buy over the years, that car remains to this day one of the best cars I had ever owned. It was cheap to own, it was cheap to run, it was just overall a cheap, basic car, but it provided everything I need. And yeah, it may have only had 88 horsepower at the time, but let me tell you, it was more than enough to haul all my gear and so on and so forth. I drove that Escort absolutely everywhere. I drove it from here in northern Ohio to Baltimore, Maryland, up to 6 days a week, and it never ever left me stranded. In fact, I was driving it to work one night, and I ended up hitting a deer, so violently, in fact, that if the car had airbags, they would have deployed. But thank God it did not have airbags. But even so, even with a bungee cord holding that hood down, that car still ran and drove perfectly. The only reason why I got rid of it is that the heater went out and I just needed something that was going to be a little bit more safer and a little bit more reliable to use every day. It definitely wasn't proving to be safe driving around in the middle of winter when you have to constantly scrape off the windshield yourself without a heater being your assistance. So yeah, I eventually traded the Ford Escort for a car that I'll unveil in part 3 in my upcoming videos. So if you like this video, feel free to subscribe for more content, and I'll have more videos of the cars I've owned coming along soon.